Why didn't many elves have beards? We know that they're immortal, which also means they're incredibly long-lived. They're said to not actually reach physical maturity until they're around 100 years old, but even then, after they've grown an adult body, why don't they grow beards? Well, the answer is actually a bit tricky. You see, the elves actually have several different life cycles. You can think of them a lot like childhood, adolescence, and adulthood for normal humans. Elves experience the same thing, but since their lives are so incredibly long, thousands and thousands of years to be exact, their bodies develop differently. With humans, it's easy to explain when they get beards. Men go through puberty, and they grow a few hairs on their face. For dwarves, it's kind of easier since Tolkien said male and female dwarves had beards from the minute they were born. That's right, you didn't probably expect it, but baby dwarves had beards. But with elves, they didn't get beards when they were born like dwarves, and they didn't really get it after they went through puberty like humans. Instead, elves received their beards during their third cycle of their lives. Again, elves lived for a really, really long time. They came into being before the sun and moon were even created, so at least 4,000 years before the very first age even began. By the time Frodo left the Shire to begin his quest to Rivendell, there were elves who had been on the earth for thousands and thousands of years, and they didn't have beards yet. Elrond didn't even have a beard, and he was one of the oldest living beings on Middle-earth, having been born in the year 532 of the First Age. He was over 6,000 years old and had neither scruff nor even a few whiskers. So in order for an elf to reach the third age of their life, they must have been nearly 10,000 years old or perhaps more. And there's one bearded elf we know from Middle-earth who lends support to this idea. Cirdan, the elf who Gandalf and Frodo met at the Grey Havens, is known to be the oldest elf still living on Middle-earth in the Third Age. Tolkien describes him here. As they came to the gates, Cirdan the shipwright came forth to greet them. Very tall he was, and his beard was long, and he was gray and old. Now, we've already said that elves don't receive their beards until their third cycle, although this is kind of one case that is an exception. What that means exactly, what the third cycle means, we don't really know because Tolkien never fully addressed the various cycles of elves. But from what he said about elves and their aging in general, I think we can guess a bit about it. First, elves are immortal and their bodies are actually meant to last as long as the world itself exists. That means if they go to the kingdom of the gods in the west, Valinor, then their bodies will live forever, or at least until the whole world itself is destroyed. But, alternatively, if they stayed in Middle-earth, away from the grace of the Valar gods, in the kingdom of Valinor, then elves' bodies would slowly dissipate. Their elf spirits were so bright and powerful that they essentially burnt through their bodies until they were nothing but phantoms. Imagine wraiths, but instead of expressing fear, anger, and sadness, the elves whose spirits lingered in Middle-earth were mostly peaceful. They just loved the land too much to leave. So in order for their bodies to deteriorate to the point of becoming lingerers, as Tolkien phrased it, the elves needed to age. They could do so simply by being alive for a long time, or they could do so by experiencing great sadness or grief or, general world weariness. So when Tolkien states that elves would typically get their beards in their third cycle, perhaps it means that after their spirits had sufficiently worn through their bodies, up to a certain point. And I imagine that deterioration could be accelerated, as I said earlier, not just by spending a lot of time on Middle-earth and away from Valinor, but from also experiencing the hardships of the mortal world. It's kind of crazy to think that elves like Elrond hadn't experienced enough of the world to grow beards though, or that they hadn't suffered enough tragedy. Elrond had seen the world destroyed by Melkor, and later Sauron, and eventually even had to let his daughter become mortal and die. If that's not enough reason to grow a beard, then what is?